Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. So, Chai with my Bhai is back, and Alhamdulillah, this time season 3 is going to be available on the podcast app, both on Android and Apple devices. So, if you're on either of those, then click the link below, inshallah. Subscribe to the podcast. I promise you, you're not going to want to miss it. And now it's accessible for you wherever you are. If you're on the train, you can listen to it with your headphones in, or you've got AirPods, Beats, whatever headphones you have, inshallah. You can listen to it wherever you are, whenever you want, inshallah. And if you're watching on YouTube, as always, just remember you can watch the video. And all the previous episodes from the last 2 seasons are available on YouTube. If you go to the playlist on Nasiha Session, the YouTube channel, if you go to the playlist, it's called Chai with my Bhai. You can find all the previous episodes there. And inshallah, from now on, all the future episodes on the podcast app. Peace. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to another episode of Chai with my Bhai. Now, today is a very, very special episode, alhamdulillah. We've got the pleasure of having Ustadh Muhammad Timhambu. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you, okay?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah. And we've got the usual brothers, Saad and Imran.
Minus Strides.
And Strides is missing today,
He's,
Fadlullah wa ma shafa.
Missing in action,
And so is Gulet. But inshallah, they'll be back soon.
inshallah.
So today, alhamdulillah, we've got the privilege of having Ustadh Muhammad Timhambu with us. So we thought let's tackle a topic that we feel is really, really relevant to today, especially in the West where we live. And that is the issue of manhood. Alhamdulillah, and I know a lot of sisters at home. Sisters usually have an issue with, why have men sitting around a table talking about women's issues. If we today, let's talk about men's issues that men have, and what it means to be a man in the first place. So I think we'll get started with from the origins. Obviously, when we look at role models and examples of how men should be, where should we start? Who do we look towards? What's the origin of how to be a man, if that makes sense?
Can I ask a question just before that?
Go for it.
Just to kind of just set the pace for that discussion. Sheikh, why is it important for a man to be a man? What's even important about that?
Okay, so one thing that I started first of all thinking about is the ayah in Surah Al Imran, or the story in Surah Al Imran, with the family of Imran, when the wife of Imran, and she said, "Inni nadartu laka ma fi batani muharrara fataqabbal minni." I have dedicated this child that's in my womb, I've dedicated it to the service of Allah. So accept it from me, O Allah. And then she gave birth to a girl. فلما وضعتها قالت ربي إني وضعتها أنثى. She said, I've given birth to a girl. والله أعلم بما وضعت. Allah knew better what she had given birth to. وليس الذكر كالأنثى. Men are not like women.
Okay.
So one of the things I think is really beautiful in Islam, and I've never found this difficult to understand, or I've never found it particularly complex or particularly worrying or troubling, that men and women have unique and special qualities that make each one complement the other.
Okay.
And one of the saddest things I think in our time, and I think I can say this without getting banned from every university in the West, but one of the things that I find really sad is the loss or losing the distinction, and having losing those special qualities that make a man, and the special qualities that make a lady a lady. And I use the word lady very deliberately, as opposed to just make a female a female. Any those qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has uniquely made to complement, each to complement the other. Now that doesn't mean that within those qualities there are not shared qualities. In fact, many of the things I'm going to probably bring up today, inshallah, are actually shared qualities. They actually should be within both genders. But it's just nice to go back and say, if Allah said وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى, men are not the same as women, or the male is not like the female, then what makes the man, and what makes that person different? What's the unique or special things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has encouraged within men? And as we're going to see, many of these are shared, and many of these you could do a subsequent session, although it probably wouldn't get you any fans with the sisters in that sense. And that is to talk about what are the special qualities that make a woman a woman, or make a woman a lady. So that's something is also to think about. But that's where I got thinking. In terms of examples, no doubt, our uswatun hasana is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Our example is the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the prophets generally as a whole. And each of the prophets embodied these qualities, these qualities that are qualities that almost qualities of the fitrah. And this is another thing I thought is really interesting, that in a way, what we're talking about here is not just Islam, but it's just fitrah, like naturally. Even when recently I've been doing a lot of research into the time prior to Islam, the time of Jahiliyyah, and just some poetry and some of the biographies of the people and some of the history and stories. And what surprises you is that many of these qualities were present and were praiseworthy then as they are praiseworthy in Islam.
You're talking about the times of shirk.
Even in those times, it was those qualities were praised. The poets would praise people who had those qualities, and sometimes they'd falsely attribute them to themselves and then get themselves into trouble because if they mentioned how brave they were and how noble and generous they were, and then when it would be put to the test, it would be found wanting in that. But the point is that Islam never erased those qualities or never said remove them, although Islam added to them and provided some balance and some, if you like, restrictions and some things, removed some of the things that shouldn't have been there. But Islam refined those natural qualities that have been praised in almost every society. So like in this, if I can start off and just to think about something, think about the word chivalry. Like a lot of people, if you ask them about something that's supposed to be manly, supposed to represent a man, talk about chivalry.
So Sheikh, could you define chivalry?
So I'm gonna define chivalry, but the interesting thing is, like, okay, if you ask someone today what chivalry, they might, if they even have heard of the word before, say holding a door open for a woman.
That's
literally what came to my mind.
that's
what comes to most people's
mind.
Hold the
door for a woman.
Hold the door open for.
Get up on the train, or
get up and give someone your seat.
Yeah.
But chivalry, apparently, from what I researched, it comes from a French word which is connected to a horse, and it means the qualities of a warrior who fights on a horse. That's what the word originally means. So it referred to all the qualities that these non-Muslims would have said that to be a knight. Like, remember, a knight was a level above the sort of
soldier.
Regular soldier who just fights on his own 2 feet. Sort of to be someone of that level, of that prestige, you had to have certain qualities. And so they said things like courage, honor, justice, courtesy, helping the weak, defending the oppressed, and they kind of like packaged it up in the qualities of what they expected from their knights and their warriors, who often, of course, were not very friendly towards Islam. But I just thought it's really interesting in the way that they took that as, even in their culture, they had a certain standard expected of men to be a real man, to be a knight, not to be just the guy that brawls with people in the street. To be like a true warrior, you had to have certain qualities, and you had to embody certain qualities and have certain traits.
So Sheikh, would it be correct in understanding that, so for them, even like, because obviously this word became it was the word that was
watered down.
Yes, no, as in this was the word that you kind of used to describe how one should respect a woman and treat a woman, right? So if that's the case, then so like a man who's strong and respected and noble, that one of his characteristics is that he would respect women and not just kind of abuse them and play around with them. And like we find some brothers nowadays, what they do is they feel like the manliness is how many women you can sleep with, or how many women you've got running after you that you can kind of just treat like t-shirts, take one on, take her off the next day. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Oh yeah, definitely, and there's definitely not a quality of being a man. It's not a quality that a person is disrespectful. In fact, all of these cultures, and we're going to come to Islam, because remember that Islam, every single good quality, every single good characteristic, Islam is more deserving of that characteristic.
Of course.
Every single positive trait of a person's character, it's really sad that we as Muslims often look to either non-Muslims, or we look to certain, non-practicing or people who have deviancies and things like that. And we talk about their manners and we talk about their qualities and we talk about, their values. But anything that is good, Islam is more deserving. Al-Islamu awla bihi. Islam is more deserving of it. And Islam, so subhanAllah, if you look at how Islam calls a man to behave towards a lady, and that every interaction that you have with a woman should be based upon her having rights and expectations from you. That's in terms of marriage, right? And that Islam prohibited all kinds of what you would call dubious marriages. So they used to call them marriages, but in reality they were just dubious relationships. But Islam, even though they were done under the pretense of marriage, even they weren't done under the pretense of just, a person just sort of messing around with having different women on the go at the same time. They were done under the pretense of marriage. Islam still prohibited all of those things and kept only the marriage that is based upon dignity, respect, and valuing that woman and giving her value and not treating her like property. And remember that Islam is a religion that came when a woman was considered basically to be a kind of property. And there's no value in that, it's just like, you might value something you own, but it's not like, you don't value it as a human being, it's just like, it's just decoration for or it's just a matter of prestige, like a trophy.
Like an object.
And that's why they use the expression a trophy wife, like it's just there to people, for people to, show off or whatever, but there's no respect, there's no dignity there. And Islam took all of that away. So it's not like there's a lot of misconceptions, and as we go through, we see a lot of misconceptions which people have about how men should behave. And that, in many cultures, and it's a non-Muslim concept, it's not a Muslim concept, that the man is, a sign of manlyhood is that the man has a lot of partners, a lot of relationships going at the same time, and isn't really attached to anyone and doesn't really give women respect.
Like a player.
That doesn't at all correspond, not even with their own ideals, that, the idea of chivalry and the idea of, respect towards women and treating people with dignity. And it definitely doesn't match with the Islamic definition of manlyhood.
I have a question though. But how would one actualize chivalry with the opposite gender as a Muslim, as a practicing Muslim? I'm not talking about here about your wife, but I'm just talking about like women on the streets, because just generally speaking, like in Western culture, we have this concept of, like, for example, open the door for the woman so she can walk through, or, give up your seat on the bus or whatever have you. But these kind of interactions can create fitna. Like, for example, I was reading Fusul Adab by Ibn Aqil, and he mentioned that, even if there is a young woman and a man says salam to her, she shouldn't respond back, or vice versa. In case that fitna might come about. So if we have certain instances where, salam is something amazing, something from the deen, in fact it's wajib for someone to respond, but the Shaykh is saying in this instance, don't respond to the salam because fitna can come because of this male and female interaction, then how would one kind of balance that with the concept of like opening the door for like a sister? Like, these are kind of real life examples that people experience in university and work and whatnot.
So I think this idea of opening the door, I think that's really there's nothing wrong with it, but it's really kind of like, that's the maximum the non-Muslims could think of, right? Like, that's like the ghaya that they could get in terms of respecting
of manhood.
a woman is like, if you
like
open
putting
the
a
door
jacket
for,
down over
like,
a puddle so she
that's
can
like,
walk
I
over
I don't think anyone does that, bro.
I saw that on an episode of Tom and Jerry back in the day.
Okay.
So I think that it's not. It's about, first of all, what I would say. I would summarize it as respecting her limits and respecting her status. Maybe that's a good term for it.
Okay.
So if we consider that woman to be someone valuable as a person and someone who is honored in Islam, then we have to honor her like that. And part of honoring her is that we respect her limits. So we don't stare at her. I think one of the greatest signs of chivalry is a person lowering the gaze. Because that's a real respect. That's if I didn't respect you and if I didn't have that, that care like that, or that status, you didn't have that status in my eyes, you know, I wouldn't care about things like that. But the fact that I make the effort to lower my gaze and not to look directly at that person, there's a degree of respect in that, as well as obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From the wisdoms in that is there's a degree of respect and respecting people's limits. And I think not putting yourself in a situation where you get into fitna and you end up in a situation where you sort of devalue, or you don't give that woman her status and her value in Islam. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said regarding فَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتَ مِنْ أَبْوَابِهَا وَأْتُوا الْبُيُوتَ مِنْ أَبْوَابِهَا, that come to, if you're going to go to a house, go to the house through the door. I.e., if you're going to do something, do it in a proper way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated for you. And so if someone wants to marry a particular woman, then he does that in a proper way. He doesn't get involved in these like relationships, and he's not a person. And also, I would say from another angle, when it comes to relationships, is that really if the limit of a man's attention is just all the time thinking about women, you don't find this quality in any of the biographies of the people who really achieved anything, either in the deen or even in the dunya. That they're like shughuluhum ash-shaghil, the thing that kept them busy day and night was just running behind women all the time. That's not what you don't find that among anyone who achieved something. Even if you look among some of the biographies of the non-Muslims, generally speaking, you don't find that as being that a quality, that all day and night the person just running after their desires and shahawat and running after women here and there and disrespecting them. So I also think that that's another aspect, that if a person finds that that's what they spend their time doing, there are big things that, you know, one of the things about the man is the man's supposed to be a person who has, you know, has like a drive, has like a goal, a vision. You know, they want to change society. You want to do huge things for yourself, for your community, for your deen. You want to really like be a person who has a massive effect on yourself and other people. But you can't do that if you're the only thing that keeps you busy all day and night is just chasing after one woman after the next. So I think it's a balance between, number one, when it comes to the Muslim woman, respecting her limits, that if a person feels that she's a suitable person to marry and wants to get into that relationship, that it does that the proper way. And that's even in non-Muslim culture has been a part of chivalry. You know, that a man goes to a woman's father and says, I seek your daughter's hand in marriage. That's a part of chivalry. It's a part of like good treatment.
In case people think that, you know, these are like old-fashioned things, like even today, if one was to actually physically touch the queen, they'll be arrested for that. That's a criminal offense, to actually touch the queen. Why? Because she's got some status, you see. But like, I think it's actually really powerful that Islam doesn't allow, forget the queen, you can't touch any woman. So if that's the level and the way that you treat your queen, then for us, we're trying to treat all women like that, give them that kind of status. So it's you know, because women, you know, I've been in that situation before, you know, when there's a non-Muslim woman and she pulls her hand out to try and shake it, and then you say, you know, I can't shake it, and then some of them they appreciate and they're a bit shy. Some of them they're a bit cocky, and you know, what, you don't see me equal to you. If you see me to be equal to you, then shake my hand isn't equal, you know, all that kind of stuff. But what they don't realize, subhanallah, like they have these even these concepts in their own society. That, you know, like the queen can't be touched. So what are you? You're just, you know, you've dropped your own level.
Yeah,
you've dropped your own level.
So the other thing I think is part of, if we talk about good treatment of women as being part of the characteristics of manlyhood, then I think the hadith, rifqan bil qawarir, be gentle with the fragile vessels. I think that's a really profound and a statement which has a lot of benefits in it, in the way that you treat a woman. That just generally being considerate, that's what rifq is. It's not, for example, that she's necessarily that, what's the word? It's not just softness, but like being considerate, being gentle, being kind, being compassionate, thinking about what she needs and thinking about, you know, that's all part of the attributes of a real man, as opposed to the guy who's just pretending to be a man. And has taken, you know, the concept of manlyhood from, you know, somewhere else, from the movies or from whatever, you know, like the real quality is someone who has that care, consideration.
Absolutely.
And, you know, like sometimes when you see the brothers get together, this always troubles me. You know, when the brothers get together and then they start, what's the word? Not disrespecting, but they become very relaxed about it, and they like to show how inconsiderate they are towards their.
As if it's a sign of
towards,
manhood.
as if it's a side of manhood. Yeah, that's
That's
it.
a big problem.
You know how inconsiderate they are. Like, oh yeah, I don't go home for, you know, a week, and I just you know, do, you know, whatever, you know, like I just, and you know, like I say to her, like, oh, you know, I'll just marry someone, and all that kind of like kalam comes out.
Sounds
I know
familiar.
a few
And that's
brothers like that.
completely
Very familiar.
opposite to what the
Yeah.
Prophet said.
Sallallahu
Khayrukum
alaihi
khayrukum
wasallam.
li ahli.
Yeah.
The best of you men, the ones who are the most, you know, embody the characteristics of a man, is the one who is man enough to be good to his wife.
But Sheikh, don't you think there's a balance in that? Some brothers, when they, they're a bit, you know, too under the thumb when it comes to their women, to the point where they don't come out, they don't do anything.
Yeah, so
It's
what we're
two
going to talk
extremes.
about is
Yeah.
that in manlyhood, there's definitely a
So I think it's a part of
balance.
manhood to be able to say,
no, there's definitely a balance.
Yeah.
But if you look at what the Prophet ﷺ said,
Sallallahu
the best man, the man who is the best, the man who best embodies the traits of a man, is the one who is man enough to be good to his wife.
wow.
So-
That's the reality of it. And a man shouldn't feel embarrassed among his friends to say that, actually, you know, for example, I'm going to go home because I haven't seen my wife for a while.
No.
And it's not right. It's not right not to give her that kind of
Yeah, Sahih.
attention.
Absolutely.
It shouldn't feel like that. And that's the thing, that when the brothers get together, that's how sometimes the conversation goes. And that's, again, another misconception that we didn't take it from Islam. In Islam, if you should be man enough to be able to have that care and compassion and softness. And that has to go with all the other things,
Sahih.
like independence of thought,
You see, that's
you
my
know.
point, because some brothers,
leadership, you know.
I'm with you there. That's my point. Some brothers, I feel like it's easier for men to go the other extreme, which is to
But
just
no,
kind
let's
of just,
talk about something here, right? So let's talk about leadership.
Okay.
Leadership is definitely a quality of manhood, being
Yeah.
a man. Yeah, is to be able to be a leader.
Uh-huh.
And there are so many examples of that. There's Ibrahim as an ummah.
Yeah.
There's the dua wa ja'alna lil muttaqina imaman, make us examples for the muttaqeen.
The fact that the prophets were
The
men.
prophets were uswa hasana. There's a lot of examples for that. But also part of being the qualities of being a leader is not being frightened to consult the people that you're responsible over,
Absolutely.
and not being so aloof and above and on, you know, on top of your ivory tower that you're unreachable. And this, I'll give you some examples of that. If you look at the hadith of the women who, you know, all those women that were the hadith of Aisha, all those women who were talking about their,
Zara.
yeah,
Hadith
they were
Zara.
talking
Hadith
about
Zara,
they're talking about their husbands,
husbands.
yeah. One of them gave the example, like, you know, like a camel that doesn't have any meat on it, on top of a high, like a rocky and a high, hard to reach mountain. So the scholars, they mention the example of this is someone that is hard to reach. It's a husband. He's unapproachable
Emotionally
because
disconnected.
he's just in charge. You know, like, I'm just running the show, and he doesn't feel, what's the word, safe in his responsibilities.
Okay.
Like, he's not. He
What do you
doesn't
mean by
have-
that? Sorry.
So he's not like, he's a person who, because who feels he needs to stamp his authority down, because aslan he doesn't have the ability, he doesn't have the leadership and the authority to actually be comfortable just interacting with people who he's responsible for.
Just insecure, basically.
He's insecure, so he has to be like right up on the top.
Like,
And then she said, even if I climb the mountain to get to him, he's like a camel that has no meat on it. You know, so even when I climb up the mountain and make all that effort just to reach him, there's no benefit in it anyway, because, you know, it's like I climbed that whole mountain to
It's a
slaughter a
dry
camel that didn't
personality.
have anything eatable on
there's
it anyway.
nothing to give, yeah.
Yeah, there was nothing to give. So I think also on that if you're going to be, if a man wants to be a leader, not just for, like we're talking about his family, but just generally wants to be the head of the household and wants to be responsible for his family, he's also got to have that quality of leadership, which is the ability to talk to the people that you're responsible for and not be frightened to ask advice and not be frightened to take advice from them, because you're secure in the responsibility that you have and you know you can deliver it. Whereas what you find is when people are insecure in that position, they're constantly trying to affirm that I'm responsible. So constantly, you know, with
It's like a bully.
the stick,
They're
you know,
insecure themselves.
you know,
yeah.
I'm in charge. I'm the one. I'm Qawwam. I'm the one that Allah's given, made responsible. I'm the one who. You shouldn't need to be like that, because if you're doing your job properly, the people you're responsible for automatically step back and let you take that role, because they know that you're going to do it as justly and as fairly as possible. And just like Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he was responsible for the Muslims and he was a leader over the Muslims, he wasn't shy he didn't find it difficult for Umar to come and give him advice. He didn't feel threatened by Umar coming to give him advice. He was able to be a leader for the whole of the Muslims, but at the same time, he was humble enough to be able to sit with the people that he was responsible over. We're not just talking about family, but he was responsible for all of the Muslims. And he was able to take advice from them and able to be secure in his ability to lead other people.
Sheikh, I'm with you there. Like, you know, like even one of the best examples of in the story of Hudaybiyah, when the Prophet ﷺ, he consulted Salama radiallahu anha, and you know, stuff like that. I'm really with you there. But, you know, I'll be honest. I don't know this. I might get some stick for this, but one of the things that really makes me cringe and really kind of makes me feel really uncomfortable is that, you know, some brothers, like, you ask them, you know, to do something, or you come up with a plan, and straight away it's like, yeah, let me. I have to ask my wife's permission. It's not even consult.
Seek permission from the boss.
Yeah, like, and wallahi, you know what it is, Sheikh? They say it with pride. I have to seek permission from, you know, the big boss. Yeah, wallah, I've had.
You said it, yeah.
I'll be honest. Me personally, I think to myself,
Never heard anyone say that ever.
wallah, I'm not gonna. I had a few shit, and you know, I had a few people who say that who said that to me.
Well, let me ask the boss.
Huh?
Yeah.
One said, let me ask the boss. Some say, you know, I have to seek permission from the wife. But I'm thinking to myself, bro, that just doesn't seem
But
manly.
do you think that sometimes happens because the person knows how much they've transgressed on their wife's rights, and they're frightened that they have to
I know some of these brothers like
make up for that? Sometimes that's the case.
You think so?
Like that, it's like, you know, like if a person was balanced to begin with, and only put their foot down when they really needed to, then generally they know they wouldn't have that issue. You know, like,
It's true.
if they've been someone who's been given attention to their wife at the right times and so on, they shouldn't have an issue or a concern or a worry about, for example, need to stay out a few extra hours or whatever. But then there's a difference also. We'll make an excuse, you know. نلتمس له العذر. يعني we'll look for an excuse for that brother, that it might be something that he had promised his wife. And if you've promised someone, this brings me to another quality of manlyhood that was known in Jahiliyyah, and that is al-wafa.
Keeping the promises.
If I make a promise, I keep my promise, even if I make it to my enemy.
Yes.
If I make a promise, I keep it.
Sheikh, one thing I want to ask, what does Islam say about a man when it comes to the issue of chores around the house? So, first of all, does Islam say anything about what a man should do? Like, as in, what can be expected of a man? Because like a man goes out, he works. Generally, obviously there are women who work as well, but a man will go out, work, come home, he's tired, knackered, and you know, certain jobs that need to be done. So, what's the sort of, because I know this is a topic that a lot of people discuss and think about, but Islamically,
they asked Aisha radiallahu anha how the Prophet ﷺ used to be at home. And she said, كَانَ فِي خِدْمَةِ أَهْلِهِ. He used to serve his family. He used to be in the service of his family. And that again is a part of the quality of leadership. That if you're a leader and you're the one who has responsibility, you see yourself as in the service of the people that you're responsible over. You don't see yourself as having that arrogance and pride. Like some people, when you give them leadership and you give them responsibility for things, they take it in a way that leads to arrogance and pride. And so they see themselves as being like permitted to do whatever they want. Whereas the sunnah really is that when you are responsible for someone, you see yourself as being in service. I'm there to serve the needs of the people I'm responsible for. Whether that's a small congregation in the masjid, whether that's my family, whether it's my children. I'm there to be, to be a khadim for them, to be a servant, to serve their needs by making the right decisions, by helping out where necessary, by not asking them to do more than they can bear. So one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ, how he used to serve his family, he didn't used to ask them to do more than they could manage. And that was how he was with his servants. It was how he was with his wives. It was how he was with his children. It was how he even was with an animal, even with animals. Like that. And like Anas radiallahu anhu said, he never raised his hand to a woman. He never raised his hand to a servant. He never raised his hand to an animal. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So kana fi khidmati ahlihi, he was in the service of his family. And the scholars say that this service of your family, there's nothing defined in that, this is something that goes back to urf, it goes back to what people customarily do. But at the end of the day, it's something that if you want your wife to serve you, as in to look after your needs and to take care of your house and to take care of you, then you have to be willing to give some of that back. You have to be willing to give some of that. And that's another quality that I had of manhood, is that ultimately, if you look at history of great military commanders and among Muslims, and you read their biographies, they were the first in line. They were not frightened to get their hands dirty. And that's ultimately a big quality of manlyhood, that you're not frightened to actually get involved in it and do things. This idea that, you sit on your chair and you kind of just direct, you do this for me and you do this for me and you do this for me. Can you imagine Khalid ibn al-Walid? Can you just imagine, radiyallahu anhu, can you imagine Khalid ibn al-Walid like running a battle like that? Just being sat on a throne somewhere, like at the top of the battle, just saying, you just go over there and fight for me. Just go fight that guy for me. I was in the front row, doing things himself. And that's how you have to be also with your family. Like you shouldn't be frightened. If you're the one responsible, you take as a mas'uliyah. So another quality that I had written down is responsibility. That you take this mas'uliyah, like as a man, I've got a lot of responsibilities. To be honest, I believe that a man generally should have more responsibilities than a woman in most situations. Most situations, not all situations, but because like of the hadith, as an example, that the woman who fasts, who prays her 5 daily prayers and fasts her month of Ramadan, she obeys her husband, she can enter Jannah through any of the gates that she wishes. The husband has mas'uliyah, has a lot of responsibilities to get to that level that he can enter any of the gates of Jannah that he wishes. He has a lot of responsibilities. So if you take those responsibilities really seriously, you're willing to lend a hand for those to be fulfilled, because you know that it's you that's going to be asked about them Yawm al-Qiyamah. If your children are not getting a proper Islamic education, or are not properly, in terms of their etiquettes and their manners, they're not properly where they should be, it's you Yawm al-Qiyamah who's going to be asked. Before your wife is asked about what she did, you will be asked about what you did. You will be asked, what did you do? So somebody who takes that responsibility is a person who is then, when they see that there's not enough hands on deck, they get themselves involved, and they go and do the things that need to be done. So if they see that there's some work needs doing in the house, first of all, they don't have the arrogance. They're not frightened to take a step down and say, what it is, my servant should be the one clean the house, but they're tired, they've been doing whatever, I'm going to do it. My wife is the one who should be sorting out the food, but you know what it is? She's got other things. She's busy with my children. She's busy with this. She's got responsibility. She's got some things that she had promised to do, some people to teach. She's busy with something. So I'm going to take that responsibility, because he knows ultimately, Yawm al-Qiyamah, he's going to be asked about all of that. So I feel that the person shouldn't be frightened to help his family out. And that's part of being confident and being an inspiration to other people. Being someone who people look at and say, subhanAllah, wow, that's like, and I don't know, it was mentioned about Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, and regarding his family.
Yeah.
I remember that being mentioned. You remember that being mentioned?
Yeah, his wife mentioned that.
His wife mentioned about that how, like that, subhanAllah, that if you told the people how much he used to be in the service of his family, they would look down on his wife and say that his wife never used to do anything, so because of how much he tried to take the responsibility from his family, because of that hadith, kana fi khidmati ahlihi. So he always try to to have that balance And it's interesting, that hadith of the 11 women has so many benefits in it. But one of the nice ones is the positives and negatives between this particular woman who complained about her husband, or had something to say about her husband. And that she said, إِذَا دَخَلَ فَهِدْ وَإِذَا خَرَجَ أَسِدْ وَلَا يَسْأَلُ عَمَّا عَهِدْ. So the scholars have positive and negative ways, but the positive one is really interesting about this, is that he's playful at home, like a leopard. You know, he's playful at home. And when he goes out, he's like a lion. Like he's brave. Everyone is fearful of him. He's brave. He's got a personality. He's got a presence among people. But when he goes home, he's like a playful little cat. You know, he just plays around with his family, and he goes down to them and plays with them. Yeah. And he doesn't ask about. And again, the scholars have a positive and negative. He doesn't ask too much about. He doesn't too much about what is sort of the things that he's asked them to do. He's not too heavy-handed. He's not behind them too much on what have you done, what have you spent my money on, what is this. He's relaxed about what they do. That's the positive way. And they have a negative explanation, because this is interesting hadith. For many of the things the women say, there are some scholars who took it positively,
And some took it negative.
and some who took it negatively, because it can be both. So
Sheikh Saif, next week, do you want to explain this hadith?
maybe inshallah.
Maybe 2 days or
That'd be
something?
very good one.
I think it'll be very good.
It's really good.
Hadith
It's really
Muzara,
good.
wallahi. We actually have the poster made already, you know? We actually have the poster already made for this particular hadith. We
Okay,
just
let's
need someone
Yeah.
to teach it.
All right, inshallah. We do it inshallah ta'ala. We do it
Inshallah.
inshallah. So one of the things we were coming back to is this issue of responsibility, and the issue of maturity also. Now, subhanAllah, I read some of the stories from the biographies of the people of the past, and like it's one of the ones we teach to the kids a lot about, and we teach a lot of the qualities of manhood. Just like some people's biographies are just easy to teach from. So for example, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, rahimahullah. When you talk about a very young teenager, you imagine, that you're the last Umayyad sort of quote-unquote royal family member, and you find yourself in the middle of Baghdad at the time when the Abbasids have just slaughtered all of your relatives, everybody, and you're the last man standing, and you're a teenager. You have a little cousin, little brother, you just have, and you've got sisters, you've got family to look after, and you look at that kind of maturity that these people showed, and how he not only escaped that area, he not only got his family out, broadly speaking, he then managed to set up his own entire kingdom virtually by himself in Al-Andalus. And he started that process when he was he was just a teenager. And subhanAllah, we look at teenagers now and what our teenage boys are out doing, and you just think, subhanAllah, look at the maturity. How many of them, if they came home to find their family being slaughtered in front of their eyes, if they came to find that all of the burden of carrying on the legacy of their parents, their people, their family was all on their shoulders, like looking after all the other family members became on. How many people can show the maturity? I'm not saying nobody, but how many people can show the maturity? And then what do you think a person like that can achieve in their life? Like, you think maximum they can just go from hiding to hiding, place to place, but then to achieve something huge like that. SubhanAllah, there are stories that really show that I think is a big quality, is maturity, and seeing something like vision, having something more than just what you're involved in right now, and seeing things, seeing the bigger picture. So I think that's also a big one. One I touched upon before, which I really want to come, and I mention this all the time, is haiba, presence. Like, this is a quality of a man, in all honesty, and that is that having a presence, that when the person speaks, the people listen, and when the person walks into the room, the people are doing something that's wrong or not right, they stop doing it. And that's how Umar radiallahu anhu used to be. You think about Umar radiallahu anhu, and it's interesting when you talk about strength. A lot of people put strength on the qualities of being a man. But one of the interesting things about it is that Islam put less emphasis on physical strength and more emphasis on strength in
Character.
iman and character. Even though Islam still put emphasis on physical strength.
Yes.
And still physical strength is more beloved to Allah Azza wa Jal than a lack of it. But it didn't put the greater, Islam came and refined this idea that just pure physical strength is that's a pure quality of a man. The more physically strong you are, in other words, the more you can deadlift, that's basically, that's the quality of how much of a man you are. But Islam refined that and said, yeah, that's a brilliant thing, that's a beloved thing, you being physically strong, but it's more about strength of character. And so the person who controls themselves when they're angry. And like Umar radiallahu anhu, when the shaitan used to run away, when the shaitans run away from Umar, he didn't run away from Umar because of his physical strength. Ran away from Umar because of the strength of his iman. And Umar had a presence. That's one thing you can say about Umar. When Umar would walk into a room, that's it. Everybody would be quiet. Everybody would turn and look. And we're not talking about that thing. We're not talking about arrogance, and we're not talking about being over other people. We're talking about somebody having there's no other word for it except to have a presence. And that comes when you embody Islamic characteristics and traits. It doesn't come, you can't build that by any other way than by implementing the traits and the characteristics of a Muslim, of how the Sahaba used to be, and through knowledge and so on. Look at the scholars. And sometimes, subhanAllah, the scholars, people that you would never imagine them to have that presence, right? Like in terms of physically when you look at them, and yet the Shaykh walks in, and everybody, you can feel that presence. Everyone's waiting for them to say something, and that has associated things as well, which is that issue of wisdom and thinking about what you say and measuring your words. Because to be honest, the one who just talks all the time, they don't have that presence and they don't have that wisdom. People don't expect, don't turn to them for advice. Whereas you see the person that has that wisdom and who's been given that gift by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, people value them even when they're children, small children. You see even stories from the seerah of small children, people like, for example, Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhuma, and how the Prophet ﷺ would bring him and involve him in what these much, much older men were discussing, matters of state, matters of government, matters of war, matters of Jannah and Nar, huge, big issues that affected the whole world. And, a young boy, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, a young boy would be involved in those things because of the wisdom and the thinking about what it is you're going to say. If you want your words to have value, you have to, say less of them, basically. Otherwise, they don't have the same.
But Sheikh, do you think this characteristic of haiba, presence, and whatnot, speaking less and wisdom, is connected to knowledge? I generally speaking, I find that the more ignorant a person is, the more they say stupid things, the more they say silly things, the lack of presence they have. Like the more knowledgeable a person is, like even Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, it's interesting that that's the example that you use from amongst the Sahaba, and he became the most knowledgeable of the companions in tafsir eventually. So he had that knowledge there.
So it's interesting if you think about what makes a person like that. Knowledge is definitely one thing, and also strength is another. But we talk about strength, like strength having a strong character and someone who yamliku nafsahu.
No.
He controls him, he has self-control. And that's why I put on my list of qualities self-control. Really being someone who controls everything about themselves, controls their tongue, controls their actions, controls where they go and what they do. Very, very self-control person. Strength also, because Umar, part of Umar's presence was his strength and bravery, and also being a person who does things. Again, when we talk about saying things as well, one of the things about talking too much is also that you become a person who talks a lot but doesn't do a lot. Whereas if you look at Umar was not a person who talked a lot, and it was a person who did a lot. And if you got on the wrong side of Umar, like physically he was a person who was a person of action rather than
words,
rather than a lot of words. And if you look at just the older companions, how few narrations they narrated as well. And a lot of that was for two reasons. Number one, because they were busy with action. They were busy, running the affairs of the state, of the ummah. So that obviously meant that they had less time or that less reports were taken from them. So that's one thing. But also that caution over what that they had learned and memorized, and being careful that when I say something, I want it to be of value. So I think that's also profound. Knowledge is one, strength is one, character is one, and being a person who's known for getting things done is definitely something that leads to a person's having a presence, someone who's known for actually delivering. And like we were mentioning before, which we didn't really finish, is the topic of al-wafa. Someone who's known that, when I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. And that was something when I went through these and I found it really beneficial for myself. I found a lot of flaws in myself when I was going through this, as anyone does when you look through the characteristics and akhlaq and character. But one thing I worry about a lot is that it's so easy to make commitments and not fulfill the commitments you make. It's very, very easy to just say, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, inshallah, I'll be,
Leave
and
it to me,
even the word inshallah has become known as a cop-out.
Get out clause.
Get out clause. Like,
get out jail
it's
clause.
just like, inshallah, I'll help you. And one of the things I'm trying or consciously trying to do is to make less commitments to people about things out of an aim of being able to fulfill more commitments, deliver on more commitments. Because I think that's a major thing. Al-wafa, even in the time of Jahiliyyah, that was a major thing. That who is the one who, if he says he's going to fight, he's going to be with you, he's got your back, he's actually going to be there when it when it's needed. That was considered to be a big big positive attribute of real men in the time of Jahiliyyah, that if he said, I'm going to promise you this, he was really going to deliver on it. So I think that's also something that Islam kept.
Unlike these brothers who they make these rap music, so drill music. Said, I'm going to do this to the guy if he comes to my area, I'm going to do this to him. And when the guy comes to the area,
but you know what it is? That's not surprising, because we actually are told about that in Islam. We're told about the shu'ara, and the people who follow them, in terms of, not to say that rap music is shi'r, because it's not, it's music. But it has that element of poetry and words, and the shu'ara were known for being people who said a lot and didn't do very much, except those who believed and did good deeds. Those were people who fulfill what they said. But you have all sorts, from al-Mutanabbi and all these different people who got themselves into huge trouble because they used their poetry to brag about how brave they were and how strong they were and how, there's no one can match them. And then when it actually happened...
Wow, subhanAllah, so what happened to him?
Yeah, when actually happened, we go through the stories later on.
That's exactly what happens to these guys. They're so funny, wallah, and it's gotten to the point where it's actually starting to become a bit comical, even though it's very sad what actually takes place. But like, they'll make a song, like attacking another person's area. That person will come, put a gun to his head, or maybe even stab one of them, and they'll make a video of him, crying like a little girl or running away like a little girl. But he won't learn the lesson. He'll go back to the studio, make another song, and then it's just like it's a cycle like that, man. So that's definitely them brothers. They need to pay attention to this.
Sheikh, I just want to go back to, you mentioned about commitments and stuff. So, like we find a lot of brothers these days, we use the term yes man.
Yeah.
Brothers, you just can't say no. Like you mentioned about taking on commitments. What's the balance between being, because a lot of the time people are going to ask you for things left, right and centre. And if you don't have the power or the ability to say no to them, no matter who they might be, you're going to end up, like you said, taking on way too much, not being able to get things done, and then you're going to have a reputation of someone who's cancelling all the time, or not getting things done, or not finishing things. So what's the sort of balance that you're meant to have between being nice to people, accepting that, yeah, cool, I'll do that for you, and at the same time being able to say no?
Like balancing that with like narration with the Prophet ﷺ, where a young girl will be able to just grab him by the finger and take him around the whole city, and he would give her like his whole time. So when you hear that, you kind of feel like, I should say yes to everyone. I should try and be there to help as many people as I can. And then when you do that, you end up actually upsetting more people. because
Yeah,
you don't
definitely.
get the job done.
This is something this is something I have huge issues with, and it's something that if I'm going to give you advice on it, I'm going to give advice to myself first of all. And I think that generally you have to understand that when someone asks you for something, first of all, there's a big difference between doing something immediately for someone and promising something at a later date. That's the first thing that is. I can always do something immediately for someone. Someone can take me by the finger and take me anywhere they want, because ultimately that's my time right at this moment in time. It's not something I have to remember or deliver on later on, or something I have to, that I have to work my schedule around. It's like, if I have some time now, yeah, I can give that time right away. So one of the things I did is try to deliver on more promises right away. Example, someone says, simple example, someone says, make dua for me. So I'm making an effort to make dua for them at that moment.
I actually do that as well.
At that
Yeah,
moment.
I actually do that as well.
At that moment.
Yeah, I actually do that.
Because I don't want to have to then store that in my mind that later on, unless they said something like, make dua for me on Arafat, which is like,
that's stress.
like
That is stress.
that's one you have to just note down and remember. Yeah, but generally, if someone says make dua for me, I'll try to make dua for them at that moment in time, because you don't want that. It's easier to deliver on something right away
You remember it?
than it is to remember it and then have to plan for it and all that mental energy required. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you have to understand that when you promise something and don't deliver on it, you actually hurt the person far more than if you just said to them, look, and it's about how you say it. And it's about saying that, look, I really want to help you. And I think what you've suggested to me to do to help you with is amazing. But I don't want to commit to something that I'm not going to deliver on. And I want to be a person that ultimately, I would love to be a person that has a reputation that when I say I'm going to help, you can be certain that that's going to happen.
Reliable.
Inshallah ta'ala. But instead, it has become for most of us, and I include myself at the top of the list in this, is that it's just that when someone takes a commitment from you, they don't take it seriously because they know you're a person who makes a lot of commitments and doesn't deliver on them. And the problem with that is you're going to be asked about it Yawm al-Qiyamah.
SubhanAllah.
And it's not, you're going to get a lot of sins out of things that you try to do to help people. And there's no benefit in that.
SubhanAllah.
So I think what you can do instantly, do it instantly. What you can take your commitments seriously, don't take too many on, and try, instead of having a backlog of loads of commitments, try instead to take few at a time but deliver on them, and then when they're finished, take on another set of commitments and deliver on them, and ask Allah Azza wa Jal for His tawfiq. But that could lead us to another one. I had another characteristic, which is the ability to deal with pressure, having a cool head. And even the non-Muslims, praise it. And I have to be honest with you, Rudyard Kipling's poem that he wrote, and it usually starts with if, it's usually called, they just call it if. He wrote a poem about the characteristics of, he's a non-Muslim, wrote a poem about characteristics of what it means to be a man.
Okay.
To be honest, so many of these characteristics were, the point what I was making is that that even among the non-Muslims, these characteristics are present, and they praise them, as that this, if you have these characteristics, you'll be a man. And one of the ones that they put at the top of the list is that when everyone else is losing their cool and losing control, you're the person who is able to handle pressure. And that in Islam we have the hadith about the strong person being the one that can control their anger when they're angry. And more than that, you see how the Sahaba behaved, for example, in the battle of the Ahzab, when all the Ahzab came, and how they said, this is what Allah and His Messenger promised us, and Allah and His Messenger told the truth, and it increased them in Iman. They said, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, and they got on with the job, even under immense pressure to know that the entire Arabian Peninsula had gathered against them. So I think this is something, again, that The non-Muslims praise it hugely and often include it among the first 5 or 10 of the qualities of a man.
Yeah.
That when everyone else is losing, and they don't mean man versus woman here. It's not a man versus woman thing. It's not. They mean it as in a real man versus someone who's not a real man. And that's what I wanted to say really about the conversation we're having here. It's not really a man versus woman thing we're talking about here.
What separates the men?
It's more than what separates the men from the boys, basically. That's what we're talking about. Not because a lot of these are true of women.
Yeah.
Like that, a lot of them are true of both men and women. But what makes a real man versus someone who's just pretending? And one of the things is definitely that person keeps their deen before everything else when they're under pressure. How many people under pressure, they start to compromise their deen? Compromise on so many things. They start to compromise their deen. They start to break their rules, start to lie. They start to cheat. They start to, betray people. They start to compromise on so many things because they feel a pressure on top of them. And likewise, in terms of defending people and looking after people's interests, so when the pressure gets there, they walk away. They're not there. So one of the things you see about the Sahaba radiallahu anhum is that when they were under pressure, their religion didn't falter. Their religion never ever budged, and they had thabat. وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. They say, رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا. Oh, our Lord, pour upon us patience. وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا, and make our feet firm. That's a quality of a warrior right there. That's a quality of a real man right there. That you're a person who has an abundance of patience in a really tough situation, and your feet don't budge. You don't turn away and run away. And that's even in Jahiliyyah, they used to consider that to be, a sign that someone wasn't a real man. That it's a fake. Is that he didn't have firm feet. That when the swords clashed, it's a person who just turned around and ran away or wasn't there in the first place. They promised, I'll be there to defend you and I'll be there to defend your honor and whatever. But when the swords came to clash with each other, he either wasn't there or he's the first one to run away. Yeah, subhanAllah.
When they brought in the women's perfume.
So this is the thing. The qualities of manhood is one of them, like you have to have firm feet and being cool under pressure. I personally would term this Islamically as a type of patience. It's a type of sabr. It's a type of sabr. And I would emphasize that again. Before we're talking about pressure at work, we're talking about not compromising your deen when you get pressure. Pressure from family, pressure from your society, from your community, but you don't compromise your deen. You stick to your principles. And that's another quality as well. Having principles and values and sticking to them.
So how do you apply that correctly from the angle of obviously today, you've got a lot of youth, unfortunately, living this road life on the streets, trying to be gangsters, and everyone wants to be that guy who gets it cracking. Everyone wants to be that guy who's known that he will do it. No one else will do it. He's the one who will stab. Why? Because he's that guy. He's the man who is known to do it. He's the one who's got that haiba, but for the wrong reasons, as in it's more like reputation. How is it to be applied correctly? What's the correct way of manifesting it?
So you came across a really good point here, which is, you raised an excellent point, to be honest, which is that a lot of the young people today, and this is what I came to understand when I studied this topic and I started putting stuff together, is a lot of our young people today are actually craving these qualities.
Yes.
And that's why we have these,
them.
These gang issues, and that's why we have these stabbings and these killings and these all this stuff we've been doing. This is because people are craving, they're not getting these qualities. Society is stripping them of these qualities. Society is increasingly, praising effeminate men. Men that behave like women.
Yes.
And have, womanly qualities that were traditionally for women, considered to be womanly qualities. And they're constantly pushing that upon people. And of course, people don't have anything to use, there's nothing to direct their energy. There's no khair to direct their energy into. So what happens, I believe, is that a lot of these young people have something in them that in a way is a good quality, but it's being misused. It's being misdirected. Like they want to embody these qualities. They want to embody loyalty and bravery and strength and having a presence,
Yes.
but it's not being directed by Islam. And what I will simply say is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. If mankind doesn't have Islam to set them up right, you're going to reach the very peak of oppression and ignorance if you don't have Islam to guide you. If Islam's not there to fix your character, and Islam's not there to guide you how to use that strength, you're going to oppress people with it. If Islam's not there to direct you how to have that loyalty, or what loyalty is, and that loyalty is first of all to Allah and to His Messenger and to His religion before it is to, you know, your friend and your people. And that's why, for example, if you look at the Battle of Badr and you look at Mus'ab ibn Umair and what happened with his brother, and he said, "You're not my brother today. You're not my brother today. Like, who are you? You're just a person that we have the same mother and father, but you're not my brother." Loyalty is loyalty to Allah, to His Messenger, to the Deen. But if you don't have that, you want to have loyalty, because these are fitrah, remember.
Yes.
These characteristics are
Yes.
fitrah. Every man wants to be strong. Every man wants to be known to be loyal. Every man wants to be known to be the guy that when the swords meet, he has thabat. He doesn't move his feet. That's natural. You can't take that away. And as much as you try to take these kids and turn them into, you know, like
Girls.
drones and girls, you know, basically combination of the two, you know, like either you try to turn them into just robots that just, you know, blind, it's go on that 9 to 5 and just, you know, go through that grind, do the same thing every day, and then you just make them like effeminate and you encourage that, then ultimately this is what happens. These groups of men and groups of young guys and also young girls as well come up where all these things are happening because they're trying to, their fitrah is telling them, this is not what you guys are calling me to, this is not my fitrah. But what we're trying to say is that there is a third option. And that third option is Islam. And that Islam takes those qualities and develops them in a way that removes you from dhulm. It takes you away from oppression. And it takes you away from ignorance. And it takes you away from all those bad aspects. Because remember, that's what happened in Jahiliyyah. And in reality, I believe the young guys today that are doing this kind of stuff, they really are like an embodiment of Jahiliyyah, of what life was like in Jahiliyyah. Isn't that exactly what life was like in
SubhanAllah,
Jahiliyyah?
you're right.
Exactly like in Jahiliyyah.
That they still had these good qualities, but
They had
doing them for the
they
wrong
had a
things.
fitrah that was telling them to be brave and strong and courageous. But the problem is that, you know, more often than not, it involved getting drunk and, you know, stabbing your cousin or cutting his hand off or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what Jahiliyyah was like
Yeah.
in the time when before Islam came. And Islam came and said, you know, those good qualities you had in Jahiliyyah, the best of you in Jahiliyyah will be the best of you in Islam, but on the condition that you now remain firm and upright as a Muslim, and you let Islam refine your character and those qualities so that you can actually achieve your potential that you have.
And that's so true, Allah, because you actually find that some of the brothers who have these, you know, who come from the street life, when they actually do start practicing, they're some of the best of people, wallahi.
So,
As opposed to some people who might, you know, they come from a Jahiliyyah, but it's like a different, it's not, you know, they don't have those characteristics.
But it's so strange, don't you think, the way that is, there's so many parallels between it and between the Jahiliyyah that existed in the Arabian Peninsula before Islam.
it's crazy because people say that, you know, it was different back then. You know, these knife crimes and these are social issues that, you know, you can't solve with Islam. You need to look towards, you know, new things. But literally the exact same
To be
problems
honest,
that were
wallahi,
there back then.
if you actually look back at it, wallahi, sometimes you see that Jahiliyyah was actually worse than today. Like those days,
Yeah,
a man will come and gamble his wife away, or gamble his children away. People are gambling in the bookies, but no one's gambling away his mum or his wife. So, and the same Sharia, which we're calling people to now.
I'm sure there's probably one nitty out there.
Say that again?
I'm sure there's probably one nitty out there who's gambling his wife away. Or his
No, but
girl.
just saying it's not common, but that was
back
common
then it
for
was
them.
common.
So I'm saying, you know, these people, so the same Sharia which we're calling people to now, which you're talking about right now, Sheikh, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ came with that to people who are worse, and it happened to provide solutions to their problems. So why wouldn't it not him? Sheikh, I have a question though. You see, this was one thing that we have a bit of a, I don't know, I don't want to call it like a unique kind of battle, because I don't know, maybe I'm not looking at it right, but there is something quite, you know, tricky about the fact that there's this actual assault on being a man. Like even this discussion right now is in some arenas seem to be so not politically correct. And how, like, what, you know, how can you say characteristics of a man? What is a man? You have a guy who's a male. He's got the male organs, but he's identifying himself as a woman. Sometimes he's identifying himself as gender neutral. He's saying, I don't know if I'm man or woman. Sometimes he's identifying himself as what?
Like little kids are being encouraged to wear dresses to school.
To wear dresses. And it's getting crazy to the point where you can identify as an animal. I'm a cat. Literally. And you can actually, like if I was in a corporate environment, if I refused to address him the way he wants to be addressed, I could lose my job because I don't want to accept that you're a cat. As if forget that, but the concept of like, you know, the whole like transgender movement and LGBTQ, I don't know, however many alphabetical letters they've added onto the end. How do you like have your manhood? Like you know, there's such an assault. I think it's to whatever people aren't even realizing. I'll give an example. I was in a store one time, just a clothing store, and I was walking past the Armani section, and it had a picture of this football player, Cristiano Ronaldo, and it's in the men's section, and it's where the jeans are, and literally, it was a very provocative picture. Like it was posing, it's the kind of pose that you shouldn't be standing in front of a man like this. Like, you know, he's just wearing his jeans, low cut jeans, wearing them low, like looking into the camera. And I was thinking, this is the men's section. Like, it would be wrong if you done it in the women's section, because, you know, that kind of promiscuity and encouraging that is wrong. But I'd still understand. But why are you putting this in the men's section?
You know what is, I think that what really helps is actually to go back, instead of looking at what is happening now in terms of what is being pushed and the kind of agenda that's being pushed right now, is to go back and say, what does Islam say? What's Islam have to offer? Because a lot of people are thinking, you know, now it's becoming more and more acceptable. It's becoming more and more unacceptable to have negative, in society, to have any kind of prejudices or negative feelings towards things like transgender or being gender neutral or whatever the other things are that people call it or terms people use. But actually, it's what I find really beneficial is go back and see, what does Islam have to offer? If someone's watching this and saying like, I'm supporter of all those letters of the alphabet and or symbols. I don't want to exclude the symbols.
There's symbols as well.
There's symbols as well.
Okay.
You know, like, because you could be a plus. That's like we don't want to discriminate against any letters of the alphabet or
bring them all in.
Symbols, you know, but
symbols, numerical, decimals, whatever,
that's
fractions.
It. But ultimately, someone might be saying, well, I feel supportive of that. Somebody should be allowed to choose what they want, and you know, we should be more understanding of people's different needs and whatever. What does Islam say? So what I think Islam says is what is completely natural for people to believe. First of all, Islam says that men and women are different. Men and women are biologically different. And I hope that that's not against the law to say that by now. But it's actually a biological fact that men and women are different.
Psychologically different.
Psychologically that's alhamdulillah, like I can say psychologically different, but I just want to start with, at the moment, I think we've gone past that. We've gone to the level of, can we just establish that men and women are biologically different? Yes. You know, like they are different. And Islam doesn't say that one of them is, when it doesn't look down on one of them in terms of the opportunity to earn reward. And there's a profound ayah in Surah An-Nisa, which I always go back to when I'm explaining issues of whether it be feminism, whether it be people who identify as being different genders or whatever it might be, anything like that, about men and women, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Wallah, this is like, to me, this is just, it's natural. Don't seek to get something that Allah gave to someone else. You know, if Allah Azza wa Jal gave you a certain biological form, don't seek to change that biological form to something else. If Allah gave you a certain characteristics, certain traits, don't seek to covet what someone else has been given. Allah has given with wisdom different things to different people. Men have a chance to earn reward and women have a chance to earn reward. So men and women are equal in Islam in a very important part, and that is they're equal in their ability to earn reward. No one has had their opportunities for reward and opportunities for Jannah restricted. Now we don't deny also, Islam doesn't deny that there are some people there are some men who naturally have a natural sort of or naturally have certain traits that make them I don't know, I'm trying to find the right word because I'm going to give the wrong word. I don't say effeminate, but they have some traits that are maybe less associated with men, or not as traditionally associated with men. But Islam says, number one, it should be natural. You shouldn't be bringing those traits upon yourself, attempting to try to be someone that you're not, or try to change who you are. It should be natural. It shouldn't be encouraged. It's just something natural. Like some people naturally have a high voice and some people naturally have a low voice. But you shouldn't be trying to change your voice and make it from low to high in order to sort of behave like differently to how Allah has made you. And also Islam recognizes that there are some people who are born with very unique medical issues, and those are considered by the scholars and given proper consideration. So nobody thinks that Islam oppresses somebody who's born with certain medical conditions where they have an issue where they have perhaps biological features of different genders, or they have perhaps traits of different genders.
Hermaphrodite, right?
Issues to do with. I'm not familiar with the terms, and I don't want to use the wrong term.
Yeah.
But someone might have medical issues, in which case Islam again gives that proper consideration, and a scholar makes a sensible determination about what should be done to help that person in terms of their physical self and in terms of their emotional self. I think that's very natural and very sensible. Don't try to be someone you're not. Don't try to emphasize certain characteristics in order to sort of try to become like someone from the opposite gender by trying to change the characteristics that you have. And if you have a unique situation where truly there is a real biological reason why you're not, or why it's not, there are certain things need to be done medically or whatever, then Islam has rules for everything. Like, to me, I think that personally seems like very sensible, very easy to understand, and men are different from women ultimately. But if we don't accept that, and I believe this whole movement came originally from not accepting that men and women are different. Equal opportunity for reward, equal opportunity for paradise. There'll be many women ahead of men in paradise, and some men who will be ahead of women in paradise. It's not this world that matters, it's what's in the next world that matters. And so if we have a chance, both have a chance to earn paradise, why would one of us crave what the other one has? And why would one of us seek to have what the other one has? That to me, and then ask Allah from His virtue. If there's something you want, ask it from Allah. If you want to be stronger, ask it from Allah. If you want to have more, responsibility, and you believe you're able to take that on, then ask it from Allah. If you want something, ask it from Allah, but don't start craving what your neighbor has or your friend has, or your brother or sister has, and trying to become like someone that you're not. That's, I think, a very sensible, balanced and fair way a natural way of dealing with things. So that for me is what Islam has to offer to this debate. And I think that if it ever gets to the stage where Islam or Muslims can't say what they have to offer people, then that's very sad that it gets to the point where you can't explain what your religion has to offer to the society, or has to correct and improve the society you live in. That's a very sad thing.
Sheikh, one last thing I want to ask you in terms of characteristics that you've mentioned is the issue that I feel like is a very, very big disease these days, is the lack of protective jealousy, ghira, in men.
In both. Let's say in both.
In both?
In both.
Okay, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. I see. SubhanAllah, I've actually never thought of it that way. Yeah, you're right, actually, yeah, in both. And, well, because we're specifically talking in the context of manhood and being a man, so Because I feel like there are two extremes, although I find that generally speaking, majority of people fall into the not enough. However, there are some people who fall into too much. I don't know, can there be too much ghira? For example, if a brother doesn't want to send his wife to a class, for example, because he's like, no, because, you know, there's a teacher there, he's a man. So like, or, you know, is there such thing as too much ghira, or is all ghira good, or, you know?
So let's not, without giving an example, because the example might get us into controversy where we get away from the principle. Yeah, I think there can be too much. And an example of too much from the hadith, which of what happened with Aisha radiallahu anha, even though it's the other way around, when she broke the plate, and the Prophet said, "Gharat ummuk, your mother was jealous. Your mother was jealous," in a protective way, you know. So that's an example of where it can go beyond what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed, and that's why the Prophet made her give her plate back to the wife who had sent, and many said it was Salama who had sent the food. So even though it's a natural thing, and even though generally it should be tolerated, and we should try to understand it and try to be understanding of it, and that's why the Prophet was understanding of it. He didn't give her a really hard time. He just said, "You broke the plate, you have to give your plate." But it still can go past what Islam allows, and that's why when you talk about haya, and I think this is something this is a big topic, because how many men actually think that haya, shyness, is a quality of being a man?
I was actually going to mention this earlier. You know, that's one thing that you find that is so messed up. Like, if a man's being shy, people look at him like he's being feminine.
Yeah, that's an example of how Islam redefined what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
But
and the Prophet says, I'm coming to the issue of ghira, I'm getting there.
No, in terms of shyness, what do you mean by shy? If a man's shy,
so the first thing is, what is haya? Haya is a quality which prevents you from doing something that would reduce your status in the sight of Allah, or something that would lessen your honor in the sight of people. That's how some of the scholars define it.
Okay.
So it has an aspect that relates between you and Allah, which is that you don't do the haram.
Okay.
And that's because you're shy of disobeying Allah. You're embarrassed to stand before Allah having disobeyed Him. And also, you preserve your honor in front of the people. And one of this, you know, how many times we talk about manhood, we talk about honor. But we talk about honor sometimes in the wrong way. So think about, like, for example, honor killing, right? So where somebody takes the life of someone that is not within their right to take, that is not being permitted by Allah, out of a misguided concept of honor. But really what honor comes from in Islam is your behavior, your haya, your shyness, to do something that would cause your honor to be affected, cause your people to have something valid to say about you, that something true that they would say about you, that you haven't acted honorably. So that's a part of haya. It's also about people, and it's not about showing off for the people, or it's not about my reputation being more important than who I really am. But it's about my behavior, not doing something that would cause me to lose my dignity in front of people. And there's a lot of times we might do that. So a person might be, you know, let's say, known for being, I don't know, studious and studying and working hard, but then go and do something that causes them to, you know, causes their dignity to be affected. You know, something that's undignified, it's not right. It might not even be necessarily haram, although usually things that are undignified would be haram, but something that just takes away from their dignity. It just lowers their dignity. It takes them down a notch. And haya is something that stops you from doing those things. It stops you from doing haram, and it stops you from doing something that is undignified. It's not befitting for a person to do, even if it doesn't reach the level of being haram. Why I mentioned haya, come back to this issue here, all the way back, is that you can have too much haya, even though the Prophet ﷺ said, دَعْهُ فَإِنَّ الْحَيَاءَ خَيْرٌ كُلُّهُ. Leave this person alone, because there's nothing, everything about haya is good. There's nothing bad about it. Even then, the scholars say that when haya becomes bad is when it goes beyond the limits of the Sharia. So for example, someone has an Islamic question and they need to know the answer. Them knowing the answer is wajib upon them to know the answer. And they don't ask it because of their haya. And that's not haya. In reality, that's why the scholars reconcile between the hadith, فَإِنَّ الْحَيَاءَ خَيْرٌ كُلُّ. Everything about haya is good. And this issue, for example, the hadith of Aisha, that how excellent are the women of the Ansar, their haya did not stop them seeking knowledge in the religion, is that they say that if haya is the thing that is stopping you from getting knowledge, or haya is the thing that is stopping you from doing what you need to do in the deen, like you're too scared to pray, or you're too scared to make ghusl, or you're too scared to do something because of what you think is haya, that's not haya at all. It doesn't come under the name of haya, because everything about haya is khair, it's good. So it doesn't even come under, it's fake haya, it's false modesty, it's something that's not even real. So ghira, you can say the same thing. If ghira is done properly, then in reality it should be all good.
All good.
But when it goes outside of the limits of Islam, it becomes dhulm and not really ghira in the first place. It doesn't become protective jealousy. It just becomes dhulm. It just becomes oppression. So always everything we do has to be guided by the whole of the Sharia. So we can't take one aspect of the Sharia and then disregard all of the rest. So as an example, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تمنعوا نساءكم المساجد وبيوتهن خير لهن. Don't stop your women from going to the masjid, but their homes are better for them. Someone's got ghira for his wife. He says, Wallah, I'm going to stop her. I'm not going to let her go to the masjid. She's never going to go out of the house. We say this is not ghira in the first place. This is dhulm. Because this person has disobeyed a direct command of the Prophet ﷺ because of that. Because of that. And if you now have a look at the hadith regarding Umar, the Prophet ﷺ, he saw himself in paradise, and he saw a great palace that he came to know that belonged to Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he said, I didn't enter it because I remembered his ghira. I remembered how shy, how protective he was of his privacy, and I didn't enter it. And Umar became upset, and he said, from you would I want privacy from you? Would I want to have that protectiveness from you? So it showed that Umar understood also that it has limits. And the Prophet ﷺ respected it. Yeah, the Prophet ﷺ respected it. So this is what I believe is the balance, is that we should be respectful of it. We should be tolerant of it. Even if it goes a little bit beyond what it should be, we should be tolerant of it. Because the Prophet ﷺ was tolerant of it as it relates to Aisha radiallahu anha. And also in that hadith of Umar also, there's a tolerance of it. But at the same time, we recognize that it has to have some limits, because if it goes beyond, like anything, like strength, like bravery, like courage, anything, if it goes beyond all the limits of the Sharia, it becomes blameworthy and not praiseworthy, right? So I think, it does have limits. As for classes and things like that, and not letting his wife learn, wallahi, there is each circumstance is different. Each person is different, because each person knows the certain circumstances of, for example, what his wife is like, what the sisters his wife is going to go out and be around are like, what the environment there is like, the traps of the shaitan for that person, for himself. So I think that's not something you can make a universal answer on and say it's the same for everybody, but it's something that each person has to make a decision and will answer. It's your responsibility. Each person will answer for the decision that they made. But generally, we don't want to end up disobeying a command of the Prophet ﷺ, and, for example, stopping a woman from going to the masjid, for example, and that the scholar says when there's no danger to her, there's no concern, he just point blank says you're not going. And some of the Sahaba refused to talk to people and cut off from people because they stopped their women from going to the masjid. So that's an example of how ghira can go beyond what it should be. So we're talking about haya and dignity, and not doing something that's undignified. So I think this is something where all of these things start to come together now. So we talked about strength and bravery, and those are definitely qualities of a man that make a real, separate the men from the boys. But ultimately, if that's not matched with dignity, what's the person going to end up doing? They're going to end up showing their strength in ways that are undignified, in ways that are haram. And that's how we talked about the young guys who are out there doing things that just to show their bravery and show their strength, that I'm the bravest of all of you, I'll go and do something. But ultimately, they're doing it in a way there's no dignity in it. There's no haya in it. There's nothing honorable about it. There's no honor in it. And they're putting themselves at risk of being from the people who are in Jahannam forever and don't ever get out. And subhanAllah, it's only when you bring these characteristics together that you get that balance between things like bravery and dignity. And when does courage become recklessness? Like when does, having courage become being reckless? The Prophet ﷺ was incredibly brave. He's the bravest of all of Bani Adam. And yet the Prophet ﷺ was not reckless. Yeah, he didn't, do things without thinking and without taking the asbab, the causes, and making sure that he did things in the right way. And he, set himself up to have the biggest chance of success. So there's a difference between courage and also between recklessness. And that comes when you balance all of these things in here. We talked a little bit about determination, but I think that one we need to come back to still. We haven't quite finished that one. To have al-azm. وَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولُو الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. Be patient like the people of determination among the messengers were patient. Determination, being someone who's determined to succeed. And even when you fall down, you get back up again and you still succeed and you still try to succeed. But that has to be balanced with tawakkul ala Allah. So this is where we talk about independence and what some people call it i'timad ala nafs, like relying upon yourself. But actually, that's the wrong terminology, i'timad ala nafs. What it really should be called is al-i'timad ala Allah thumma ala nafs. It should be called like being reliant on Allah than yourself. That is a quality of that that differentiates between a man and someone who's not really a man at all. Having independent thought. So we said bravery is there, but if your bravery basically turns you into a like just a copy of someone, like a drone, like this person goes and tells you do something and you just do it, like no thought behind it. What am I doing? There's no independent thinking. That's not also a sign of a real man. May be very strong, maybe very brave, but there's no independent thought. There's nothing there that's thinking, is this the right thing to do or not? What the consequences of my actions going to be if I take this road or if I don't? So trusting in Allah first of all, and then not asking people for things. Like Sahaba, some of the Sahaba, if they dropped the whip from their camel, they wouldn't ask anyone to pick it up. And sitting a camel's not easy. To getting a camel to sit down like that, it's not easy. But they wouldn't ask someone else to pick it up because of the self-reliance they had, which we're gonna rename it and call it reliance upon Allah and then upon the self. So they relied completely upon Allah, and then they did everything they could themselves, and they didn't have a habit of relying on other people, and they had that independent thought, that being able to think things through for yourself.
But is it wrong to ask other people at times? Like,
no, it's
what's
not
the
wrong.
balance?
It's not wrong to ask other people. Shura is a different thing. Shura is a quality of leadership. So shura comes or consultation is what we talked about as being a sub-quality of leadership. So if you want to be a good leader, you have to be willing to consult the people that you're in responsibility over. That's part of leadership. But you have to consult your team, otherwise you're not a good leader. But this is more about somebody
for favors, or
it's about two things. It's about not being a person who asks for help from other people. When you want help, you ask it from Allah, and you work really hard to try and find it yourself, and you only ask other people when it's that you find that to be genuinely the best course of action in the situation you're in. But also what I was talking about is more this mentality of the sheep mentality, like that your friend goes and does something and you're behind him just do the exact same thing. We talked about how someone makes a mistake and then the next day doesn't learn anything from it, goes and does the same thing again. That shows a lack of like independent thought. Yeah, like thinking for yourself. And that doesn't mean you don't consult people, but actually having the strength of character to make a decision for yourself instead of having everybody else make the decision for you. And that's the distinction between shura and between independent thought. Independent thought, if I'm the one in responsibility, if I'm the leader, then I take my consultation from my team and then I make a decision. As opposed to being the person who never makes a decision about anything and everybody else makes decisions for them. They never take responsibility for themselves and say, this is my decision, this is what I've done, I'm going to be determined and I'm going to stick to it. So I think that's also very important. I put one or two more in here that I probably haven't talked about too much in my notes. One, I think, is unique to Islam, and this one when last time I did this lecture for some of the young guys in Dubai, they were surprised I put this one in at the end. But I put crying, the ability to cry.
I was going to ask about that.
Because this really is a sign of, this is where we talk about the Islamic man, versus traditionally in almost all cultures, crying is a sign of weakness. And yet one of the things you see from the men among the Sahaba is that they cried. They cried and they were not frightened to cry. And to the point that Umar said to the Prophet and Abu Bakr, tell me what makes you cry so that I will cry, and if I can't cry, I will make myself cry. So they used to consider that crying and crying for the sake of Allah was a sign of manlyhood, not a sign of weakness. And I think that's down to and not just crying for the sake, not just for the sake of Allah purely, not just out of fear of Allah, although that is the greatest reason to cry. But even the Prophet ﷺ, when someone would die, he would cry. And subhanAllah, that is a really important balance and a really important emotional release to balance out the other qualities. Because otherwise we end up with men who, like we said, are rough and tough and don't have anything to counter that. Their hearts become hard. And that's why if you look at Umar and you look at Abu Jahl, both were extremely strong. Both were extremely brave. Both had a lot of the qualities, the raw qualities of a man. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Oh Allah, strengthen Islam with one of the two Umars, with one of these two men." They both had the qualities. But what Umar had that Abu Jahl definitely didn't have is Umar had a soft heart. So you can be tough on the outside, but if you can't have a heart that's soft and a heart that cares for other people and cares, first of all, has fear of Allah and has a softness towards the orphan and towards the needy, if you don't have that, then ultimately you don't have a rounded character of a man. You have all the wrong characteristics, like you're rough and tough and strong and whatever it might be, and you bulldoze everyone out the way and you're a great leader, but if you can't be a man in Islam unless you can have a soft heart. And that it's in terms of when the people came to the Prophet and complained about qaswatul qalb, about hardness of the heart. For example, he said to touch the head of to wipe the head of the orphan. If you can't go to an orphan and see an orphan and pat an orphan on the head and feel something in your heart, then that's all that strength and bravery and courage is just going to make your heart like a rock. And so that's what I see about crying is an expression of softness of the heart, having a soft heart, and not having qaswatul qalb, having being hard-hearted. And that's what dhulm comes from as well, like oppression and tyranny and stuff like that. It comes from being hard-hearted. So you're going to have all these qualities of strength and bravery and courage and independence and maturity and all of these things, but also you've got to have softness of the heart. That's, I think, is what Islam came with, which is totally unique from and you don't see any other culture mention this in all of their poetry, in all their qualities of a man, in all their description of what a man is and depiction of what a man is. only you find in Islam softness of the heart
Sahih.
and caring and having like being able to express it through crying. That's, I think, very profound.
Wallahi.
So these are some of the ones that I put together. I had a few others here and there. A sense of justice, readiness to help the weak. Those are two others that I had. You know, being just. And being just in Islam, what does it start with?
So
Being just to yourself, first of all. If you can't be just about yourself and realize your own faults and flaws and talk about your own weaknesses and be honest between you and Allah about who you are and where you are right now, and you don't know where your iman is, you don't know whether your iman's on a high or on a low, then ultimately how are you going to be just with anybody else if you can't be just with yourself? And then being just with other people, just with the people you're responsible over, even just with your enemy. وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ أَلَا أَن لَا تَعْدِلُوا اعْدِلُوا هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى. Don't let a hatred of people prevent you from being just. You know, even your worst enemy, you're commanded in Islam, be just to them.
Sahih.
Show justice to them. So justice is a key quality. That justice has to be one of your values and your morals. That's at the top of your list of values. It has to be right in the highest parts of is that I stand for justice. And of course, Islam is all of Islam is
Sahih, of
justice.
course.
The whole of the Quran, the whole of the Sharia is about justice. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't oppress his servants in anything. So if Allah has made injustice haram upon himself,
What about us?
and he's made it haram he's made it haram for any of his servants to be unjust towards each other, even if that means a non-Muslim, even if that means an enemy, whatever it is. But you're not unjust to anyone. So justice, and also a desire to help the weak and the oppressed. And I don't mean by the weak and the oppressed necessarily women, because sometimes men miskin, yani, he's that miskin man, he's maghlum, and she is dhalima, she's the one oppressing him.
I know a few situations,
Especially in our situation, like in our times, in the society, what we live in. Wallah, we see a lot of that situation happen, But just generally, being a person who feels that it's your responsibility to look after people who are not as strong as you are. And again, strength in Islam is not necessarily physical strength, but you see somebody who's oppressed. You see, it could be anybody, it could be, and like, I give an example. One thing I think is really sad these days, generally in the whole of the UK, is that when you see somebody getting bullied or somebody getting attacked or somebody getting threatened, how many people today compared to 50 years ago would actually stop and see it to be their responsibility to step in and...
Not many. You see videos, people being attacked or
It's the
abused in a
bystander
bus
effect.
or
People just sit there.
We just sit there.
Even on the tube, you see it, like, people sitting there in the newspaper, someone will fall over, they just keep flicking the pages, they just...
That's it. And I think that's changed even in non-Muslim society. It's changed.
A lot.
That people don't see it anymore as being their role to defend somebody who has been oppressed. And again, there is a wisdom to that in Islam. Because we got to be careful, because when we talk about defending the oppressed, straight away people start doing the most crazy things and they leave all the rules of the Sharia out, and they start saying that we can do anything to defend an oppressed person, like regardless of how many other people we have to oppress in the process of doing it. That's not Islam. Islam, you don't forbid a munkar by bringing a munkar that's bigger than it. But if you're not willing to step in and defend someone who's mustada'af, who is weak and oppressed, someone who's in need. And Allah mentioned the men and women and children who are mustada'afin. They're just, they're oppressed. And they're making dua to Allah. They're not calling out to people. They're making dua to Allah. Oh, Allah, send us someone who will defend us. Send us someone who you're going to give victory through them. So you read about, these great Muslim warriors, and generally you read about Khalid ibn al-Walid, and you read about even the late people read about, people are always talking about Salah ad-Din and, all these different people, rahimahumullah. But ultimately, if you don't have in you this concept that you are supposed to try to defend the rights of people whose rights have been taken away, then I think, in all honesty, you can't really embody those qualities, and you can't really, strive to achieve the kind of goals that people like that achieved. So to me, it's not about doing things in an un-Islamic way. Islam has to ultimately govern everything you do.
Yes.
Of course.
And it's not about going over the limits, and it's not about oppressing some people in order to remove the oppression of others. That doesn't make any sense at all. And it's not about doing something that Allah hasn't given you a right to do. But just having that, like there's an opposite side. Is that sometimes the closer we come towards the Sunnah and we distance ourselves from the sort of foolish actions that the rabble do, like the people do who don't just shabab who just don't think, like who are hudatha'ul asnan sufaha'ul ahlam. They don't like they foolish in the brain and they're young in the teeth, just young kids who just get excited about things and they start doing all kinds of haram. Is that we sometimes might lose that sense of care and that sense of responsibility towards the people who are mustada'afin, and might feel like that's we shouldn't be. Wallah, every Muslim should feel for the Muslims who are in a state of
Oppression.
who are being oppressed and who are in a state of difficulty and a state of where they're calling upon Allah for Allah to give them someone who is gonna change their condition. And everyone should feel that, but at the same time that shouldn't cause you to do something that isn't permitted by Islam, or to try and do things in ways that Allah has never given anyone victory through. Like, we'll give an example. Protesting, for example, has ever in the history of mankind, has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given a nasr to anybody through this? Like, I went through history. I'm trying to think of a single example, and if you find an example, then it is literally.
You just translate nasr for the people.
So has Allah Azza wa Jal ever given victory to a people because of this in anything? Wallah, like I'm trying to
So some people bring a shubha. They say the civil rights movement.
No, I'm saying this is why people. Even I was saying, like, if you find an example, and I'm not sure that example is even a very valid example for a number of reasons. I'm not sure whether that was protesting or more to do with other factors, like
Other factors, yeah.
civil
agree.
disobedience and
Yeah, I agree.
and also other issues around, other issues, and also that not necessarily the people who led that movement were not necessarily either people who are particularly virtuous or particularly expected that Allah is going to give them victory. But in Islam we don't say that a result in something meant that the method that you took was correct. But just generally, like, you can almost, if you can find one, you can't find two, and if you find two, you can't find three examples from all these things that are done. And it's just an example of how that maybe the core idea of feeling sad and feeling like you want to support people who are oppressed is there, but the way of doing it isn't right. And of course you got the extremism and all that other stuff on the other side, and people doing all kinds of crazy stuff in order for this. But again, what we should feel is a characteristic of being a man is that you feel a desire to defend people who are oppressed. And that includes in your own society, in your own family. Because again, we say to people are always looking on a global scale. And the global has a time for looking on a global scale. But subhanAllah, how many people talk about, for example, implementing Sharia on a global scale? I'm sorry, but that guy can't implement Sharia on his own face. How is he going to implement Sharia on a global scale? And his face is doing khuruj, it's rebelled against him. He can't do, like, he can't implement Sharia in his own family. He can't implement Sharia in his own house. He can't implement Sharia, subhanAllah, among his children. And yet he's got that global perspective. And the same thing about the weak and the oppressed is that someone they can't help the person who's next door to them who's weak and oppressed. They can't help the person in their family who's weak and oppressed. And yet, all the time it's that, I want to change the world from the top first, and not as Islam tells us, which is that we start from the bottom. And there are times you can't help the oppressed. Like, as an example, the Prophet ﷺ with Ali Yasir, when all he could do for them is to just give them words of encouragement. And he said, Sabran ala Yasir, fa inna ma'udukum al-jannah. Be patient, O family of Yasir, for your destination is paradise. But at least that was the most the Prophet ﷺ was at that time was able to do.
And
Is
he
just
did
to
it.
give words of encouragement. But he had that feeling for them, that care for them, that consideration for them, and that hurt at not being able to do anything, but still reliance upon Allah and contentment with Allah's decree and doing the maximum you're allowed Islamically within the situation you have, and starting with your home, your family, your local community, your society, your local masjid, and then growing outwards, and not having this idea that I'm gonna, change something on a global scale without even trying to change something that's happening in my own home. So I think that's also important.
The last thing I want to mention before we wrap it up, inshallah, is I just wanted to ask with regard to the concept of being an alpha male. Is this something which has a place in Islam? Is it something which should be an objective for brothers, or is it just or is it a result that comes from embodying all these characteristics that you've mentioned? Is it something that just comes as a result? Like, because I know personally a lot of brothers who feel this sense of I have to be the alpha male, even like amongst other brothers in the room. I have to be the manest man, if that makes sense. I have to be the one I have to be the most manly, if that makes sense. No problem. So what's the sort of, is that something which is praiseworthy, or is it blameworthy to want to be the manest man, if that makes sense?
I think the concept of being an alpha male is something it's not Islamic.
It's not.
Like, I think that it's a concept that is a non-Muslim concept.
Yes.
Which may have elements that are Islamic and elements that are un-Islamic. So I think like that entire concept should just be put aside, and we should focus on the Islamic concept of what it is to be a man. So for example, is softness of the heart part of being an alpha male? Probably most people would say no. Like they would say that like the definition of an alpha male is the one that doesn't have
True.
softness of the heart.
True.
So it's not that everything within that is wrong.
Yes.
I think that there's things within that are really good, but I just think that if you take that concept, you've taken something that's partially right and partially wrong, and try to implement all of it. Whereas if you just take Islam is how you should.
You'd have the best parts of it anyway.
And wisdom there's something about wisdom, and wisdom is to know when to step forward and when to step back, and when to speak and when to be silent, and when to put yourself forward and to take a position of responsibility, and when to hand that responsibility over to somebody else. That's all part of wisdom. So the problem with the alpha male idea is that you never, you don't have, there's no wisdom involved in that either. There's no softness and there's no wisdom. There's no like thought about, is this the right thing to do or not? It's all about, stamping your authority upon people, whether it's the right thing to do or not. There are times when it's the right thing to do. As an example, when you're in a group of people and those people are between doing something permissible or impermissible,
Yes.
for you to stamp your authority on that and say, this is what we're going to do. And the one who tries to be the little voice who's whispering to do something else, you shut him down. That's a good thing.
Yes.
Because you commanded that which is good and forbade that which is evil, and you did it in a way that was wise, but it's not always the right thing to do. Like, for example, if you're sitting in a group of people who are more knowledgeable than you, and then you try and stamp your authority on that gathering, that's not praiseworthy.
No, it's not gonna work.
So I think personally it's something that is, if you just take it like that Western concept, that actually it's good sometimes and not good at others. And maybe you can even say that it would cause you more harm than good in some situations. But if you take the Islamic concept and you have the whole package of what we call in Islam, or in Arabic what we call rujula, the qualities of a man, the qualities of a rajul, then I think, to be honest with you, you get everything. You know when to put yourself forward, when to put yourself back, when to be soft and gentle and playful like a leopard, and when to be like, the lion who leads the pack, and when to be sort of strong, and when to withhold that strength out of a strength of character. Because the strength of character is that you control the physical strength that you have, and that you use it in certain situations, but you don't use it in others. So all of that is a part, to me, is Islam gives you much greater balance than just being the one who's always, trying to put themselves above or ahead, or trying to stamp their authority on another group of, a group of people. I think that's more of a balance. Islam gives you much more of a balance.
Did you mention, you said that scholars, some took a negative out of the leopard and the lion. Did you mention the negative?
I didn't.
No.
Oh, did you do it
I didn't.
intentionally?
I didn't. I mean, we can mention it. There's no problem.
Okay.
So, what they mentioned about the negative about the leopard is that he only wants one thing from his wife.
Okay.
Basically. And he's not interested in her needs. He's not interested in, so in that sense, and from that he's got, he's very brave out of the house, but also they mention sometimes about that he's lazy. They also mention like that, it's an element of that. And he doesn't care. They said, and he doesn't ask about what.
Okay.
He doesn't care about what his family does.
Okay.
So they took it. Some of them took it in a
Okay.
he only wants his rights, and he doesn't care about what they do.
Yes.
And he, makes them do all the work, and is quite lazy. And then on the other side, some of the scholars took it totally positively. That he's very playful with his family and very, he's a sort of inner child and stuff like that. But he's very brave and courageous and manly when he's, out of the house. And that he isn't overly burdensome on them. And others took it as that he doesn't, he just doesn't care. So actually, in reality, both can be true, because all of those qualities are negative. All of those negative qualities are negative, and all of those positive qualities are positive. So a man should try to be very, brave and courageous and strong, but he shouldn't be frightened to be very soft and playful with his family. With his children, with his wife. He shouldn't be frightened to, the Prophet's like some race with Aisha,
Yes.
and he played with her, and when she wanted to see the people throwing the Abyssinians throwing the spears in the masjid, and she saw him, shifting his weight from foot to foot, that he was tired, and that she had kept him for a long time, but she still didn't let him go because she wanted to see that does he really care? How much does he really care about me? Is he really gonna make his feet sore because I wanted to watch, even though she said I'd finished, but I just wanted to see, how his care was towards his wife. So to be playful with your family, to be someone who's willing to give other people their rights and not just, care about your own, and to be someone who isn't overly burdensome, but still pays attention to what's going on. So you don't want to be burdensome, like you don't want to report on the minutia on every little thing.
Yeah.
Like I left, a pound on the bench today. Where did it go? Who spent it? Who took it? What was it spent on? Have you got the receipt? But at the same time, you don't want to be a person who, doesn't even care that so much is being wasted and so much haram is being done and haram things are being bought and whatever, and you don't even think about it or even care about what you're doing.
No.
So I also think that when you take these, and that's why this hadith needs an explanation, because almost every one of them, the scholars took a positive spin on it and a negative
amazing
spin
if you could come and explain it.
and a negative spin on it. Yeah.
That'd
So
be amazing.
in that way, it shows you everything that a husband should be and everything that a husband, shouldn't be.
No.
And some of them are purely negative, because they were complaining.
About
And they were complaining about their husbands. Some of them are purely negative,
No.
like being like a bone-thin camel on a tall, rocky outcrop. I can't get. If I make the effort to get to him, there's no benefit to him.
Worth getting.
And otherwise he remains far away. So that's again that a husband shouldn't be far away from his wife. He shouldn't be someone who's distant and aloof and she never get in touch with him and stuff like that. And he should be someone that if she makes an effort for him, he appreciates that effort. He shows his appreciation for that effort. He should get something good out of it, and not that I made a big effort for you and I didn't get anything out of it.
No.
So I think that's a balance. Also, I think I've tried to do that today when we talked about manlyhood and being a man. That also we didn't go to the extent where we forget the aspects like good treatment of family members, like good treatment towards your wife and things like that. Otherwise, again, you just go into that alpha male idea that, it's just about me and I'm going to just impose myself upon everybody. And that doesn't bring, in that sense, it doesn't bring any good, even though it has its benefits and its places at times. And that's part of wisdom, right? Knowing when should I do something and when should I not do something.
Wallahi, jazakallah khair, Ustadh. Honestly, that for me personally, I can definitely say this was so beneficial, where even like every point you were making, I was just reflecting and thinking about myself, the things where I'm definitely going wrong and where I need to improve, and things, alhamdulillah, I think I am doing quite well in certain areas, but I think definitely people at home will agree.
We're all doing the same. Like when I did the research for this, I did it. I'll tell you the story behind it is that we do camps for teenage boys where we take them out of their usual environment and we maybe take them to the desert. And of course, the desert is a very
harsh.
It's a place. I mean, to be honest with you, it's not the real desert, because the real desert these days is only maybe the Al-Ruba' al-Khali, the empty quarter in Saudi Arabia. Where you're like miles from civilization. But we take them to an environment they're not used to, because that environment instills it brings back those qualities. Yeah, like so leadership and independence and things like that, and it brings back those qualities. And that's why the Bedouins used to value, sending their young children to the desert, because it instills those qualities in you. And that's interesting, actually. On a separate note on that, I wonder if there's, what saddens me is certain activities, certain sports or pastimes that have lost their value as being something that builds the qualities of a man. I'm gonna give you one. Horse riding. Horse riding is almost in the West exclusively become something very small percentage of men compared to women, and yet being a horseman, like horsemanship, what they call horsemanship in Islamic tradition and Arab tradition, was something that was absolutely embodied the qualities of a man. If you wanted to know how much of a warrior a person was, can he ride a horse? How is his swordsmanship? How can he fight with a sword, and his ability to wrestle and his ability to shoot an arrow, whatever. There's so many things that we, subhanAllah, they've become lost, even in the pastimes, even in the ways we develop that. So there are things that we can do as with our kids to encourage good qualities in them as well, like how we tell them to spend their time. And one of the things I personally find very beneficial, which is just on that topic, is going out of your comfort zone and doing things that you've never done before, particularly taking advantage of going out of the city and going into the countryside. And whatever kind of countryside that is, wherever you live in the world, might be a desert, might be a forest, it might be a mountain, it depends what you have access to. But it really is character forming if you do it with the right intention. And it's beautiful because generally it's one of the most halal pastimes you can do. You don't see too much haram.
Yes.
Generally you're distant from people.
Yes.
And really, being physically fit as well. Like, I really find that, to be honest, I looked at myself and sort of a few years ago, and I put on a lot of weight, and generally, more focus on eating than actually physically doing anything. And that affects your character as a man. I really believe that. I really truly believe that affects your character as a man, like the level of physical fitness that you have. I'm not talking about to a crazy athletic level where you're running marathons, or you're carrying big rucksacks of bricks around and jogging up mountains or whatever.
Just fit
but
and
just
healthy.
Generally being healthy, physically fit, not having too much excess weight, being able to walk for a reasonable distance, being able to go out to the countryside or out of the city and to be able to kind of survive with the help of Allah Azza wa Jal, with yourself, and to be able to just experience what those qualities come back to you in those kind of situations. Because I really think that one of the things that takes these qualities away from you is the fact that we're so wrapped in cotton wool. The fact that you call it the snowflake generation or whatever you want to call it. We call it, people are just, everything is done for you, and everything is. People complain if anything is not just perfect, and people find it very difficult to live outside of their comfort zone. And what that does to a man, specifically to a man, is it just erodes all of the qualities of being a man in you. Like all of these things, you lose your courage, you lose bravery, you lose strength, you lose your fitness, you lose your ability to make decisions under pressure, because you never experience any of that. Everything is just given to you on a plate. And we see it especially in living in the Middle East, that's very, very common where I live in the Middle East, that you have people who live a very, very luxurious life and a very comfortable life. Allahumma barik, they have a lot of things done for them. They have a lot of people helping them out, a lot of money to do things with. And if you don't counter that, and that's why, for example, in the Emirates, it's very popular with the parents love for the young children to go out and, spend time in the desert and spend time learning to horse ride and learning to, falconry and all this kind of stuff that they do. Because for them, it's if I leave my child in that culture of comfort and having everything done for them, all of those qualities are just going to be eroded, totally eroded. And so the traditions, that's one of the things I find very sad, is that when we talk about places like the Middle East and where that's the core of Islamic tradition is, that so much of that is of their tradition is being eroded by the lifestyle that they have. So Allah Azza wa Jal blessed them with a very comfortable lifestyle, but that very comfortable lifestyle erodes so much of your traditions and your character. So one of the things we do with young kids is we take them out to places where there's a bit of an activity for them. It's a chance to get out of their comfort zone, leave their mobile phone behind, realize that you are able to breathe and your heart will still beat if you don't keep your mobile phone with you. And honestly, wallah, it's amazing the transformation it does to your character. But even, I think another thing that I wanted to add to this, and we didn't talk about yet, and we had it on the list, is, for example, karam. The Arabs used to consider that generosity and looking after your guest was a real sign of whether someone was a man or not, or a little boy. The difference was your generosity towards people and how you took care of your guest. And Islam preserved that. But that tradition will be lost if we don't take care of our children and raise them in that tradition. So it's about raising your kids in that tradition. So, not letting your kids learn everything from their peers. Because to be honest, if you leave your kids with their peers, how are they going to learn maturity, independence? How are they going to learn strength and bravery and courage? Generally from their peers, it's harder. Whereas parents, parents can teach their children, for example, generosity and husn al-diyafa, like really taking care of your guest and looking after people. And, the traditions that are Islamic etiquettes and Islamic traditions that used to be considered to be the traditions of the warriors of old, of the great people, of the great imams, the great scholars, the great, the Sahaba. These are their traditions that they had. And those will be lost if we don't instill those traditions in our kids in terms of spending time with them and teaching them. So like a young boy, like going out with his dad and learning how to behave in a group of men. But if his dad, let's be honest, if his dad doesn't know how to do that, how is he going to instill that in his children? And also take some time out from the the life of comfort that we live. Time out of your comfort zone. And time out of, your mobile phone where everything just comes to you. And if you don't know the answer to something, you just Google it, just take time out of that, because it erodes all of these almost all of these characteristics are eroded by just your luxurious Western, quote unquote, Western lifestyle. It just erodes all of these qualities in people. So one thing we do is take some time outside, go out of your city, travel the world. I think traveling is like an amazing character, building experience. Travel, get lost in a place where you don't know how to find your way back, and use the tools that you have or your trust. There's, subhanAllah, so many things that I'm talking about we're talking about activities that build these characteristics in people. So the work we do with young people, teenage boys, and we, you know, take them out and make them sort of give them experiences that challenge and bring these characteristics up to the fore. So that's when I was that's how I started researching these topics, and there's so many. And that made me think about myself. And so when I started thinking about myself, I saw at that time, you know, wasn't particularly active, a lot of time sat down, not doing anything. And a lot of the things that I didn't want to do as a child, like when I was young, I wasn't interested in, you know, really very interested in sport. I didn't want to do any physical activity. You know, a lot of things I didn't want to do much as a child. I went back to and said, you know what it is? Is that how I want to raise my kids? Do I want to raise my kids as being not physically strong, not physically fit, not able to survive in an environment without having a mobile phone in your hand and internet access, you know, data on your phone? Is that how I want to raise my kids? I want to raise my kids the way that the Arabs of old used to raise their kids, you know, in terms of the Bedouin life. We can't all do that in reality. You know, you can't really take your kids to the middle of the desert and leave them there for 3 years and get them back later on. But at least relatively speaking, you know, to give your kids an experience where they can handle more than, you know, this life of comfort that we all live in, most of us live in terms of the Western lifestyle. So I think that's important as well.
Wallahi, jazakallah khairan, man. Alhamdulillah, really benefit from that. I think that must definitely be the longest episode we've ever done. But it didn't actually feel that long. It actually felt like it went very fast.
I'm just thinking of all the nice ways we can chop it up and make little tiny clips out of it, because there was a lot of benefits in it.
So many benefits in that, alhamdulillah.
Inshallah, you'll take out anything that I said that wasn't correct, inshallah.
One thing I learned is I'm not the man I thought I was.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying earlier as well while you were in the bathroom, is that, you know, it really makes you think and reflect, you know, subhanallah.
Last tip, read the seerah. Read the seerah, read the seer. I don't want to say the seerah. Like, read the biographies of everyone. I'm talking about pre-Islam, the in terms of before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the prophets, the messengers, the righteous, the famous leaders, famous people who did things. You know, read the biographies of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, the Imams of Islam. You know, even down to contemporary, you know, scholars and people who have achieved great things in terms of primarily of the Muslims. And the odd ones among the non-Muslims, sometimes you can find fawaid in it, but sometimes the danger is there's more negative stuff than positive stuff. But generally, reading the seer of the famous people and the people who were the noble people, you know, really, like, you can benefit a huge amount from it if you look at these kind of characteristics and you see, like, what are the themes that even among the Arabs prior to Islam they had it, and Islam preserved it and encouraged it and refined it and improved it, and, you know, gave us the akhlaq that we have today.
Barakallahu feek.
Jazakallah khairan.
Did he speak what I was doing?
No, Saad hasn't said a single word. Every now and again, little sah.
Ad-libs.
Yeah, but alhamdulillah, you know, I hope you guys benefit from the episode, inshallah. Let us know in the comments what episode you'd like to see next, and if you want, we can bring Ustadh Tim Humble again. If there's any particular, other than ruqya, I know everyone's going to say ruqya, other than the ruqyas and jinns, if there's anything else that you guys want us to talk about with Ustadh, let us know, inshallah, and hopefully, if Ustadh's free, we'll get him done to come and do another chai with my boy, inshallah. Until the next episode, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله.